Welcome to the ChicoBag podcast, where we explore how to leave everything better than we found it. I'm your host, Andy Keller, and today we're joined by Sarah Uhl, an
Hi,
artist.
Andy. Thanks for having me.
Yes, did I say your name right?
Got it.
Sarah Uhl, an artist, a mother, and nature advocate whose work lives at the intersection of art, wellness, and environmental connection. Sarah's journey from professional illustrator to motherhood to leading immersive retreats is rooted in a deep desire to help people reconnect with themselves and with the natural world. So in today's episode, we'll explore how art can be a tool for healing, storytelling, and change, and how the creative process can serve both personal growth and environmental impact. Sarah, thank you for joining. Welcome.
And it's great to be here. Thank you.
So let's start off. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Well, I live in Western Colorado in a little tiny mountain town named Redstone. And I've been a working artist for about 12 years now. I think of myself as a storyteller. I've always identified as an artist. I think being an artist is, not necessarily always a profession, and it can be a profession. And even when I was a kid, I connected with the title of artist, the identity of artist, and feel fortunate that I haven't had barriers to let that art run through me. But for my work, I've found different ways to tell story through art using watercolor painting, illustration, maps, and a lot of it really just stems from my deep love of the natural world and how I connect with nature and how it makes me feel and show up in the world.
Well, I mean, first of all, congratulations on figuring out a way to be an artist professionally. That is no small feat. So congratulations on that. So it sounds like you're creating art that resonates with people. What do you think resonates? What in your art is resonating with people?
Yeah. I always say that I paint the felt experience more than the seen experience. And so I use a lot of color. I use a lot of interpretation and whimsical elements. I exaggerate things. Mostly I paint mountain landscapes. That's my bread and butter, my happy playground that I like to stay in and explore from. But I think, that's the beauty of art is we get to bring interpretation into the things that we make and create. And then what I am bringing forth might be different than what you receive from it. And that's really beautiful as well.
So what do you do with your art? Like, how are you, like, what's your business model and how do you sustain yourself with your art?
Yeah, well, it's ever changing. That's a great porch swing question. Right now, I've been hosting wellness retreats. And so on the retreats, we paint. And I love when I get people who haven't painted since third grade or, some period of time, or perhaps they've not identified as creative, but they have some kind of curiosity that still allowed them to choose that experience. And they are deep immersive experiences in nature as well. And so I love bringing that union together for people, that connection with nature, with tools like meditation and hiking and just the practice of being instead of doing, getting away from the doing life and coming into the being world. And then using art as a tool to extrapolate and build and explore curiosity. So I've mostly focused on offering retreats and workshops over the past 5 years since I brought children into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And mothering has also become a big part of my job title and my chosen work in life. So the retreats have been really beautiful, and it's just been a fun way to stay on my learning and leading edge as well, exploring my just evolving connection with nature, the seasons, and sharing that that layer of connection with my guests on retreat. And then using art's sort of like the secret weapon, like background tool that weaves its way in.
When you say, about when you talk about being versus doing, I always think about, we're human beings, not human doings, right? And the idea of being, like, can you tell me more about that? So you're connecting with nature, you're doing art, you're focusing on being versus doing. Like, what benefit does that have? It seems like we live in a hectic world. It seems like I have a to-do list that, is pages long. I'm probably never going to complete. What does it mean to just be?
Yeah. Should we try it for a second?
Sure.
I think it takes constant awareness to be in the being state because we're so wired in the doing state with our culture and just the way that the world has evolved. We live in a doing society. To be is, I think, just to come into presence and to um, operate from a sense of self instead of a sense of like an inward sense of self. So it's a difference between inward versus outward. So much of our to-do list has to do with things that we want to do out in the world for maybe ourself or our family or our career, our identity, which is ever evolving. But to be is to explore from within and to have the opportunity to um, notice what really matters to you and what really matters at the end of the day if you didn't do the to-do list. And I mean, it's constant work for me too. I love my to-do lists, but I'm trying to figure out how to consolidate them so that I can answer that simple question of what matters most today. And perhaps another simplified way of thinking about it is, how did I show up instead of what did I achieve today? And I notice it a lot for me right now as a parent, school days for my kids, rushing them out the door. How did I show up in those moments? What mattered more, to be kind and sweet and to allow my children to be silly with each other for an extra 5 minutes before getting in the car, or that we got to school on time? I don't know. Sometimes it's one over the other. Maybe there's an important thing that I have to do, after I drop them off. And so I have to have more grace around, no, today we are going to get there on time. But other days I ask myself, like, could I have just allowed more spacious for the being?
Yeah, I was dealing with that this morning, actually, on the way to school. Wanted to, my daughter, one of her jobs is to feed the animals, and so, like, okay, we got to go. Let's get the animals fed, and so I think it's a good a because a lot of times I find myself so focused on the task and getting things done, and forget about how I'm showing up because I can, when I'm trying to get through the list and get all the things done, I can get intense,
Yeah,
and it's a lot of times it's not pleasant.
I
you know
know. I know,
task
Andy.
Have you been there?
Yeah, I mean,
Taskmaster.
I'm definitely, one of those type A people and a taskmaster and all of that. And I think it's just interesting to observe that the medium, even within art that I chose, watercolor, it's
Yeah,
a medium that you don't always have a lot of control over. And I think there's some learnings in that I gravitated to this as a teacher and how
yeah.
I want to be in the world. And my best paintings are the ones that I don't try and control as much. I allow the unblended parts to just remain as they are. And that creates a magic that I think we all crave, that untold story, the mystery within.
Hmm.
But it takes work.
It kind of brings up something that you were talking about. A lot of people haven't painted since they were in third grade or something like that. Um, I remember when I was a kid. It's like I didn't wear a watch. I didn't have a phone in my pocket. My clock was the street lights.
Mm-hmm.
So when the street lights went on, I knew I needed to come home for dinner.
Yeah.
And being in that, you know, reality, I guess, is pretty nice because you're in the flow and you're not thinking about time. And I wonder at your retreats, how what kind of time are you following? Is it is
Yeah.
it
I
is it the
love that
street
question.
lights or is it the wristwatch?
Yeah. Well, the thing that people don't know about me when they sign up for my art retreats is that I am just a master at spreadsheets. And so another one of my secret talents as an artist. And, it's really about using your whole brain, not just the left brain or the right brain. And art brings us into the right brain, the creative act. But really, to be high functioning or to produce something like a retreat, you have to use your left brain as well. And so we have schedules. But one nice thing is that I host my retreats at places where we don't have cell service.
Mm,
I have typically, at least. Um, and so that's fun. Just there's already this container. Putting on a retreat is kind of like setting a container.
mhm.
And part of setting the container is the place or the location. And so not having cell service, not having maybe the phone right there is helpful. Um, but it's a balance. It's a balance of following the schedule that was designed with intention,
Mhm.
intention for certain amounts of unstructured time and certain amounts of structured time. And then just having also a softness and a looseness to read the room and feel the needs of the group.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of delicate balance in all of it.
Hmm. I like the idea of just having dedicated time without these kind of modern distractions, and I've done it before where like, you know, mainly because my phone's dead, where I'm standing in line somewhere
Mm-hmm.
and my impulse is to pull the phone out of my pocket and I'll start, keeping myself busy as I'm waiting in line. And when I don't have that, it's actually very interesting because then I start looking around, I start noticing, my environment, I
Yeah.
start, you know, uh, I'll have a conversation with somebody, which, is something that, we've lost the art of a little bit in our modern society.
Well, it's kind of the difference between walking or biking or driving and the amount you notice when you
Uh-huh.
choose these different modalities to move in the world is significant.
Yes. I've ridden my bike and, to work, for example, and I find that, for my commute, it doesn't take much longer to ride my bike actually.
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
which is interesting because I'm telling myself, oh, I don't have time to ride my bike, I got to get to work, but what happens is I get to work, I'm energized, like I don't
Hmm.
need a cup of coffee, I feel good, um, and like I'm actually more productive as a result, and it doesn't takes maybe me like an extra 5 or 10 minutes to get to work on a bike
Yeah.
versus
But
a
the
car.
built-in value is the way it makes you feel, right?
Yeah.
Compared to when you drive. Yeah. And the
Yeah.
sensations that you had on the bike ride versus being in traffic or whatever it
Oh yeah,
is.
and then slowing down as I'm noticing, the butterflies and the flowers and the wildlife and whatever else is happening.
Yeah.
The people and the pets and yeah.
So my
So
challenge to you, Andy, is to walk to work. One
walk to work.
walk to work one day. I've been a lifelong cyclist and
Uh huh.
I love riding my bike. I've lived in mostly locations where I can bike to work or to dinner or what have you. And more recently I've started walking more, and walking it brings a whole nother level of, but I try and do my walks. I call them medicine walks. So I'm not trying to get
Yeah.
somewhere. So inherently it already is kind of in a container of something else. I'm not using it as a tool. I'm using it as a thing within itself.
Right. It's a journey, not the destination.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know about some pilgrimages that people go on, and they actually make it. They actually kneel or bow, and have you seen these things where they're
Oh yeah.
climbing up a hill, and they're doing it in a very kind of complicated, slow way, but
Mhm.
it's the process.
Have you been to Norway?
I know I have not.
There's benches everywhere in Norway. And it
Uh,
was one of my favorite things about Norway, along the trails and the towns and these perches above town, above the sea. And what I loved about it was an invitation to stop and just to admire beauty. And just something as subtle as that built into a culture makes a significant difference in the way people perceive, say, even a trail that has a bench versus a trail that doesn't have a bench. It might be a place to exercise versus a place to admire.
hmm.
It's fun to break it down like that.
It's interesting, when you start thinking about the built environment and the intention, I guess, if you go back to the intention, creating the experiences, that actually help people live better lives, right? So, your retreats are one aspect of that, where you can help people, that maybe haven't experienced that experience it. And then when they leave the retreat, they can continue the practice, what they've learned in your retreats, in their everyday lives by noticing the bench,
That
by,
is the hope.
right. So, my thought is just like, what's the cadence, do you think, with the people that come to your retreats? It's kind of like bringing your car in for an oil change, right? It's like you got to do these kinds of things for your health and sanity.
Yeah.
How often should someone be doing these kinds of things, do you think?
Yeah, I love that question. A retreat is usually an investment, and it's investment. For some people, the bigger investment is time and prioritization of how to use one's time. And it also comes at a financial cost. So I think going on a retreat with a host or a guide that you like, or to a place or a venue or a teacher that you really admire, it is a big experience. And, I don't think it needs to happen once a year or something like that, but it does help you set that container and to understand the benefit of the time away. And once you go on a retreat with a guide or a teacher or a group, then you can kind of create your own. And so I think for me, I've started incorporating these little mini, I call them sacred silent getaways, where I just get, 2 nights away alone, and I can do the practices that benefit me, or I can do nothing at all. But I have this container of time away to be in my thoughts in a different way. I go to places that don't have cell service, and I just get in that quietude. And so I have practice at that, and so I can try and do that once a season, so 4 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
um, but I think at least once a year, having you know, a chunk of time that is, 2 to 7 days where you just are resetting and rewiring. Once you can do that on your own, you don't need a host to teach you how to do it. That's the beauty. Could be a road trip. It could be, a staycation if you can be alone in your own home, even. But that, I think it's really important to be intentional about creating the quietude and the opportunity to have a different routine that's built around intention.
Well, you're inspiring me to go do that. I know it's important, and to get me time in, to get time, and I find, for me, I call it church, but going snowboarding,
Mm-hmm.
down a hill, the only thing I could hear, I'm not listening to music, is the ice. The only thing I'm thinking about is, kind of going down that mountain and how beautiful it is.
Yeah.
That's me time for sure. And I've gone on retreats. I actually have done meditation before, and man, that is challenging for
Mm-hmm.
sure. To what I found most interesting about it is disconnecting my thoughts from my reality, or is that the right way to say it?
Yeah.
Where my thoughts are my thoughts, and I can just observe them and not judge them, and let them just kind of float through my head and then out the other side. And that's pretty liberating, because before that, I would get caught up in my thoughts, and I would really tie my thoughts to my reality. And I now realize, I guess, through the practice of meditation, that my thoughts are my thoughts, and sometimes my thoughts are, you know
Mhm.
a little crazy, I guess. And I'm like, okay, well, that was a crazy thought, and I could look at it and say, wow, that's a crazy thought. And I can let it go. I'm like, well, what's a
Mhm.
different thought? How can I look at this differently? And I could kind of play these games in my head about thought and think about things differently, because I don't have to accept the first thought that comes in my head, which, I think is awesome. So what have you learned, through your practice, and, especially with the creative outlet that you have and that you give other people? What advice do you have to people listening, that they can bring in their life that you think would be most impactful?
I think it's helpful to think about short form and long form practice. So a
Mm-hmm.
retreat is a long form practice. Even a 8-hour day snowboarding, that's a long form practice. In my life with little kids, an hour long yoga class at a yoga studio is long form practice. It
Yes.
is.
Yes.
It's not always accessible. And so being kind to yourself about what is going on in your life and what is short form and long form practice for you right now is really
Mm-hmm.
important. And throughout our life, it changes. And as we, are in different chapters with different needs and demands and interests, that changes. And so valuing the short form just as much as the long form. For some people, maybe the short form is easier because going to a retreat for a few days might be really intimidating, or it might seem like just this huge expense or whatnot. Focus on self, even just choosing yourself to give yourself that experience. Many people are oriented to giving to others, um, but just knowing the value of both. So
Mm-hmm.
short form practice could be like for me right now, it's 5 minutes behind my house, sitting with the river and, you know, having just that quiet, calm mind for 5 minutes,
Mm.
10 minutes, walk the dog. That's a nice short form practice. Um, Maybe it is meditation, but I like to also demystify some of these practices that are, just growing in our culture. I think it's wonderful, but also like you don't have to be a master meditator. If you have tried meditating and it feels hard, or you don't think you're good at it, or it's not for you, maybe there's a version of it for you. You can do walking meditation. Meditation can just be intentional, like you're saying, with your thoughts, like having that awareness of, oh, do I want to, allow this thought to own me, or do I want to redirect it a little bit and just notice and let it pass by, like, a leaf on the, wind. So, yeah, I think being kind to yourself and seeing the value, building in the value of the short form and the long form.
And it sounds like having, I mean, when you say this, it reminds me of ritual, right?
Yeah.
So people have kind of daily or weekly rituals. It might be having a cup of coffee,
Yes.
in the backyard, watching, the flowers grow. um, so we all can have kind of self care rituals where we can do this work. We can give ourselves time. And I
I,
joke sometimes, it's like, well, like my me time is on the toilet. It's like,
I've
you
heard
know,
of that.
yeah, it's like,
I've witnessed
it's,
that in my house.
it's like no one's going to bother me. No one wants
Yeah.
to bother me. That is my time. But we can also be more intentional. I know for guys, going out in the garage,
Yeah.
or getting out the lawnmower or the weed whacker or the chainsaw. It's
And
like,
we all inherently want connection with the natural world. So changing your rituals depending upon the season. We have
yeah.
a wood stove, and I'm just like letting go of making the fires in the mornings, and I kind of miss it, but it's opportunity now to go and sit on the porch swing and have the coffee outside, and allowing the seasons to guide just in these subtle ways.
Hmm.
It does so much for us. We're built to be in communion with nature, and we don't live in a world where we have to anymore. But I think it's vital to really feeling embodied and of the world that we are from, and not denying that.
I can't think of a better way to end this podcast than what you just said. It's staying connected and, noticing the seasons and being there. So thank you so much, Sarah, for your insight. Is there anything that you want to share or that I didn't ask you already?
Oh, I mean, we could talk for hours, but just as far as creative practice goes, I always just like to demystify that as well. Like on my retreats, we paint, and if people never paint again after the time I spend with them, that doesn't bother me. My only hope is that they feel a little bit more in tune with how they express themselves. So you can express yourself by singing in the shower, by the way you dress, by the way you connect with people in your day. There's so many ways to be creative, but we're also makers. We're meant to make and express ourselves. And sometimes you get to do that in your job, and other times you have to find other outlets for it, but let it out and give yourself the kindness to let the creative expression come through you, because it is just a way of feeling your value and your worth that is inherent to who you are.
Awesome. So if people want to learn more about you and your retreats and support you as an artist, where can they go?
My website, but really the bigger invitation would be to join my mailing list. It's called The Antidote. I write like a monthly newsletter called The Antidote, and I share my offerings and what I have coming up, but I really have been, it's been my outlet for writing and to sharing my own growth and my interest in a lot of the topics that we covered: connection with nature and the seasons and the moon, and all these things that tie into, you know, living in this world that is a little confusing and wacky right now, and how to choose our footing.
Yeah.
So yeah, my website's just my name, sarahUhl.com, and you can get to the antidote from there.
So SARAHUHL.com.
Yep.
Okay. Well, there you've heard it. I hope you, if you're listening, you go visit and see the beautiful art that Sarah makes. It's beautiful. And thank you so much, Sarah, for coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.